Welcome back. Today I'm continuing the process to convert my 1981 DeLorean into an electric vehicle. And on today's episode, I'm jumping into the wiring harness, which is pretty intimidating. This is most of the wiring harness out of a 2019 Chevy Bolt EV. And to catch you up quickly, I'm taking everything out of the Chevy Bolt. The electric motor, the inverter, the charger, the batteries, the electronics, everything, and swapping them into the DeLorean. This is Project Lightning. When I stripped down the Bolt, I put the entire wiring harness and all of the low voltage electronics on a cart, and now I'm going to spread them out on the floor of my shop. During disassembly, I did label as many items as I could, but there are a lot of modules that I didn't really know what they were, so my first goal is to get the harness laid out just like it was in the car. There are two sections of the harness that run down either side of the car, and they are sitting in plastic channels. And next to those channels are the connections to each of the 4 doors. Since I labeled each one, this serves as a great reference point. You can also see that there are 2 large grommets that are used to pass through the harness into the engine bay on either side. With the harness spread out, the next step is to supply the battery ground connections to it. In the Bolt, the body is made of steel and is used as a ground connection for a lot of the circuits. When running outside the car, I took a long piece of copper wire and a bunch of jumper leads with alligator clips and connected them all together. This is then connected to the main 12-volt battery post.
I saw it. That must have been it. So this light is not on. All right, I got no remote detected, which makes sense because I don't have the remote down here. Let's go get it.
Once the last couple of missed ground connections were made, I was able to power on the car. Since the car wasn't able to see the key fob, I searched for some missing grounds and found one at the back of the car near the taillights.
All right, taillights. All right. Let's see if I can go into... I see the screen is on now. Still says no remote detected. I know these things here are the sensors.
The next thing I realized was that there were a couple of modules with metal cases, and these were bolted directly to the metal body of the Bolt, so they were using that as a ground. So I hooked those up as well. You can also see me moving the brake pedal. This is because you have to be pressing the brake pedal to start the car. And when I did this, the infotainment screen came on.
I'm getting just every error possible on the screen, but it's alive. It says service transmission.
And of course I don't have the buttons. Power steering. Power steering! Drive with care. Yeah. Yeah. Safety restraint system. Yeah, that sounds about right. And service transmission, which is something I should definitely think about getting serviced. Oh, brilliant. Okay, all right. That's all for tonight. With the low voltage electronics working, I then moved on to stripping the electrical tape and wiring loom off of the wires. This was incredibly tedious and probably took me 6 or 8 hours. But it is necessary because I'll need to extend some of these wires and relocate modules. Here is what the fully stripped harness looks like. There are so many wires going all over the car, it's a lot to take in. I do have experience with some very complex systems and with electrical engineering, but this is at an entirely different scale. I then have to repeat this process on the low voltage wiring harness in the engine bay that connects all of the high voltage components. This was another roughly 2 hours, and my fingers were in terrible shape. The next day, I started on thinning out the wiring harness and removing things that I knew I wasn't going to use in the DeLorean. A big one is the safety restraint system. There are about a dozen airbags and another dozen crash sensors, and each one of them has a pair of wires that go from it back to the SRS module. I'm not keeping any of these things, so all of the wires are pulled out of the harness and I put them in a bag. All of the airbags have been disconnected and I have SRS simulators in their place, which is basically a resistor that tricks the computer into thinking the airbag is still connected. That way it doesn't throw error codes. Another thing I pulled out of the harness is the wheel speed sensors. There are one of these at each wheel, and they can tell whether you have a wheel that is slipping or has locked up, and this instructs the anti-lock brakes to kick in, or to detect stability and traction control. Each one of the sensors has a pair of wires that goes back to the ABS module. So right now what I'm doing is moving on to sort of the next phase in my wiring update, which is there's a lot of connectors that I don't need. So right now I'm working on the right rear door connector. Obviously the DeLorean doesn't have rear doors, so the connectors are gonna get disconnected. I'm just gonna clip them off, and then I'm gonna label each one. You probably can't read that from here, but this is the right rear door speaker positive. And this is a really cool thing. It is heat shrink tubing that you can print on with a label maker. So I can print out a label and put text on it that says what it is, and then put this around the wire, heat shrink it, and it will stay there. And so this way when I go back to it, I will know that the connector that I'm looking at, or the wire that I'm looking at, is for the right rear door speaker positive. And so I've got the wiring diagram up here on the screen. Comes up. So I've got the wiring diagram here on the screen. You probably can't read it from there, but that's probably for the best so I don't get sued for copyright. But it shows every pin on the connector, and it shows what pin number it is, the color of the wire, what circuit number. If I want to go search for that, I can kind of look up what it's connected to. And then it says the function over here. And so it says like the battery positive voltage is a red and brown wire. And so, yeah, it's very easy for me to look at that and then print out a label that says that thing on it and then go put it on there. So that's what I'm moving on to now, to try and clean up the wiring harness. If I wasn't too clear there, I am using the 2019 Chevy Bolt Technical Service Manual to look up these circuits. It's an essential piece of doing this build. I mentioned it in one of my original videos on why I chose the Bolt over something like a Tesla, and it really does make a big difference. I can find a wire, trace it all throughout the car, know exactly what it does and also how it works. In this case, I'm removing only about 10 wires from the rear right door, most of which are things that I will not use at all, like knowing if it's open or closed, but for now I'm going to keep all the wires and coil them up near the other end where they connect. I'm also doing the same thing for the rear left door. And with that, the entire wiring harness is completely stripped, thinned, and ready to install in the DeLorean. But before I do that, I'm going to need to get the brakes, pedals, and steering hooked up. So if this seems like a fun project, you won't want to miss out on the next episode. So please show me that you're interested and give me your support by subscribing. This is Project Lightning.